Okay, so let us carry on. So yesterday afternoon we were looking at this sutta called the Asapura Sutta. In fact, the longer discourse to Asapura, so they're probably the Maha Asapura Sutta. And we are looking at a small extract about the 5 hindrances and how the 5 hindrances are like the opposite of freedom. It's kind of an imprisonment and how to kind of emerge from those 5 hindrances to achieve a higher kind of freedom. So we're following on the same kind of topic, the same theme of freedom all the way throughout. And yesterday we had a look at the first of these 5 hindrances. And the first one is the desire for the 5 sense world, or the objects of the 5 sense world. And it's kind of interesting. In the Dhamma, this is considered a kind of imprisonment, the 5 sense world, whereas for most people that is kind of the playground. It's the playground of the world. You're messing around, you're enjoying those 5 senses. And so it's a kind of radically different the way we look at things in the spiritual path than how the world in general looks at these things. And it can be sometimes hard to relate to. And remember that the idea here is not so much that you should reject the 5 senses or anything like that. That's not the point. The point is that for those of you who are already gaining some deep meditation, you already have some insight into this because you know that the senses, they calm down when you become peaceful. They know that when the joy and happiness starts to arise in the mind, it is kind of opposed in a way to the 5 senses. It is a much more pure kind of happiness that you achieve. And so it's more like, you start to see that this is true gradually as you go deeper. And you know how satisfactory it is to actually leave those senses behind. And for those of you who don't really feel that you are there yet, well, this idea here is just to point out how the Buddha is talking about these things, and then to kind of maybe gain a bit of confidence and faith in that based on how the Buddha expresses these things. So this is not a rejection of the 5 senses. It is an understanding of trying to go beyond and then finding something higher, something more worthwhile. In the meantime, you still enjoy the pleasures of the 5 senses, including the breakfast here at Jhana Grove, and also the meals and the cups of tea in the afternoon and whatever. Going for a walk in the forest or the bush here is also a kind of enjoyment of the 5 senses. So you do what you can, and your little teddy bears, also enjoyment of the 5 senses. So you use these things wisely. It's interesting, the 5 senses is a very kind of large realm, and there are 5 senses enjoyment that is very coarse, very kind of not very refined at all, and then there's a 5 sense enjoyment that is quite refined. And in many ways, one of the things that we want to do is to enjoy the more refined aspects of the 5 senses. And as we do that, we are kind of leaning the mind towards the spiritual practice to a certain degree. The kind of classic example you find in the suttas are the arahants who still enjoy nature. They enjoy the kind of the cliffs and the trees and the animal life and these kind of things. And so why? Well, because that sort of 5 sense world actually is conducive to meditation and the jhanas and seclusion and all of these kind of things. So this is what we are trying to do. So now let's come to the second of the 5 hindrances. And the second one is the one about ill will. So what does the Buddha have to say about this? So again, we are looking at the similes here. And the Buddha says, suppose a person was sick, suffering and gravely ill. They would lose their appetite and get physically weak. But after some time, they would recover from that illness and regain their appetite and their strength. Thinking about this, they would be filled with joy and happiness. So when you have ill will, your perceptions of the world are very seriously distorted. Ill will really leads to a kind of a upside down view of reality. And just like if you get very sick, then you get physically weak, and you can't even eat anymore because your normal perceptions of life are turned upside down, if you like. So this is a standard way that the Buddha talks about ill will in the suttas. It's like you are sick. It's kind of very, and obviously that is a kind of imprisonment. It's a kind of lack of freedom if you are ill in this way. And the coming out of illness obviously is a very important thing. And so when you are in the throes of anger or whatever it might be, or even just slight irritations, it is really problematic. You are at that time, you have no idea what you're doing, and you are you think that you should be doing X when actually you should be doing negative X. It's like the exact opposite of what you should be doing. But it's a beautiful simile for ill will, this idea of illness. Because it means that you look upon people in the world who have ill will in a completely different way. We tend to get angry with other people who are angry. We tend to shun them. We tend to think that they are terrible people or whatever. And it's very difficult to deal with people who are, angry people. It's not pleasant to be around angry people. It kind of is just you want to go away, basically. But when you recognize that it's as if they are sick. If they are ill, they have a fever, they are kind of moving towards their own massive suffering in the future, just like an ill person might even die from that illness. In the same way, if you have a lot of ill will and negativity, you are basically moving towards a lot of suffering. You're suffering right now without really understanding it, and then moving towards even more problems in the future. And so this is a powerful way of thinking about people, because again it turns things around kind of quite to a very large degree. Instead of reacting negatively to people who do bad things and have ill will, you understand that they are the ones who have a real problem. Okay, you have to bear with that anger because you are in the presence or in the vicinity, but that's like a small thing. The person who is angry, they are far worse situation. And it can change your attitude towards people like that and have much more compassion for them because you understand that actually they're out of control, just like an illness. You don't blame people from the illness. I know Ajahn Brahmali quotes this novel that was written in the 18th century or whatever, where people, it's like a parody of novel, and people were blamed for the illness. And it was kind of an upside down world. But normally you don't blame people for the illnesses. These are bugs that get into your system. If you have a human body, you're going to get ill. You made a mistake getting born into a human body. That's why you're getting ill. And it's not because it's your fault. And ill will is the same thing. It is not really your fault. And it's such a beautiful thing. You are conditioned this way through the past or whatever. And so people who are caught by these things, we can start to forgive them. We can start to have compassion for them because we understand they are trapped. They can't really just move out of that ill will at will. They have to, the program is they're programmed in this way, and there isn't much we can do about it. It's a beautiful way of thinking about the world because it allows for compassion and forgiveness to arise so much more easily when we think of the world like that. And not only does it allow for compassion and forgiveness of other people, but it allows for compassion and forgiveness of ourselves. If you understand yourself in a deeper way, if you understand how conditioned you are, if you stop just going with this feeling that I am responsible, this is kind of how we feel. It feels like we are responsible. But of course that is the delusion that the Buddha talks about. So if you start to see the conditionality, how you are conditioned to do what you are, you can start to forgive yourself. People say, it's so hard to forgive myself, I made these mistakes in the past. This is how you do it. And very often, in the moment, it's very hard to see, because in the moment it kind of feels like you have free will. I can choose between, I can have porridge for breakfast or toast for breakfast, And so you choose, and it feels like, wow, this is a really free will, right? I choose the one I want. But sometimes if you kind of look at decisions you made a long time ago, and you look at the patterns of your life and how your life kind of follows a certain track or whatever, then in retrospect you can actually see how you were conditioned. How this, looking back, it looks like you had to go that way. There wasn't really much choice. And for me, the most obvious example is the idea of becoming a monk. Yeah, when I was looking at this 30 years ago, it looked like it was a choice. Yeah, of course I'm choosing this. Yeah, why? Because I'm wise, right? I'm smart. Yeah, I'm really smart. I know Buddhism is the best. The path forward is to become a monk. It's kind of obvious, and you have a conceit about that. Yeah, you think that, or whatever it is. And it does feel like a very important decision. Yeah, I'm kind of rejecting, not really rejecting, but I'm not kind of going there, I'm going here instead. And then after 30 years later, you think about it, and you wonder, how much choice did I really have? This was probably a very deep-seated part of me, the idea of moving towards spiritual life. Yeah, looking back, I can see kind of little signs of things happening from I was fairly young already. And I wasn't really happy with the other things I was doing, so maybe, so how much choice was it? And it starts to look like there were just cause and conditions coming together, and my life actually was destined almost to go in that direction. And that's kind of scary in a way when you see that. It's scary because instead of having free choice, instead of you deciding where you're going, you are very largely conditioned by what is going on. And so when you see that, when you see at least partly the illusion of free will, you understand that this sense that we have of free will is actually very much an illusion, then it makes you become more interested in spiritual practice again, because you know you have to get out of this. It's just too scary to kind of always be trapped by the cause and conditions around you. People often ask, well, what are the consequences of not believing in free will? And that is the consequence. The consequence is that you understand how trapped you are. You understand how dangerous it is. And if you have found a way out, and that is what the Buddha promises, use that way out now. Now is the chance. Otherwise, you will continue to be railroaded on these tracks that are really hard to jump. In fact, you can't jump them. You have to kind of follow those tracks forward. And maybe you get a little bit of extra conditioning so the track moves in a slightly different direction. Nevertheless, ultimately, you are conditioned in this way. And so this way, we can see that this whole idea of ill will is another aspect of conditioning. And it's a scary kind of conditioning. It's another entrapment in the world. And so you allow yourself by this sort of reflection to move out of that, to kind of leave it behind. Okay, now is the time to understand that this is actually very dangerous. There is no point in getting angry in the world. Everything is just conditioning. Observe, have compassion in the world. Compassion is always the right response. Don't force yourself not to be angry. Don't suppress the anger, because that also can be very dangerous. It can lead to all kind of mental instability. But naturally move away from it through insight, through understanding what is going on. And then you can leave the ill will behind, the the illness of anger, etc. You can that can be overcome gradually. So that is the second of the five hindrances, and the third one is all about lethargy and tiredness and lethargy, or sleepiness and lethargy. And the simile here is, suppose a person was imprisoned in a jail, but after some time they were released from jail, safe and sound, with no loss of wealth. Thinking about this, they would be filled with joy and happiness. So here we are definitely on the lack of freedom, because you are in jail, and that's kind of the antithesis to freedom. You probably all know what it feels like if you are tired or lethargic and the mind doesn't really have any energy and you can't get out of it. It's kind of, you're trapped in there and you can't really think clearly and you can't do anything clearly, and you try to do anything, it just goes wrong. That's kind of the lethargy of the mind, the tiredness of the mind. And so that is like being trapped, and sometimes you just have to wait for that state to disappear, and then you are okay again afterwards. So this is definitely a entrapment. And how do we overcome this particular hindrance? And the answer here, one of the important points about the five hindrances that I always make, is that it is the first two of the 5 hindrances are the most important ones. And the first 2 are the ones who tend to cause the last 3 hindrances. So you are lethargic to a large extent because maybe you had ill will, often you get very tired afterwards. Or you chase too many pleasures in the world through too much craving, and after a while the mind gets tired of all that craving because it's a very restless state. It uses up energy, and then you feel tired afterwards. So a lot of the time what you have to do is actually reduce the first 2 hindrances, and by doing that the 3rd hindrance also starts to it starts to lift, if you like. And then ultimately, during meditation, this 3rd hindrance, it disappears simply by progressing in meditation. As the meditation becomes more powerful, you gain more energy, you have more piti, you have more sukha, you have more happiness, you have more clarity. That is actually the lethargy or the tiredness or the darkness of the mind gradually disappearing. This is the refined aspect of that hindrance until the mind is fully energized, fully blissful. And that is where this hindrance is completely gone. But it is, as long as you have some of this hindrance, it is like being in jail. You can't really get out of it, and you have to just decondition that state. And when you are out of it, again, you would feel lots of joy and happiness, because that is the nature of emerging from any of these 5 hindrances. So lethargy and tiredness. That is the 3rd one. The 4th one is about restlessness and remorse. Remorse is often a bit like anxiety. Anxiety is a restless state. If you're anxious, you can't really relax properly. And so anxiety is another way of using this word remorse. You have anxiety about whether you have broken your precepts or whatever, and you may have some remorse as well. And this is the simile of the slave or the bondservant. Suppose a person was a bondservant. They would not be their own master, but indentured to another, unable to go where they wish. But after some time they would be freed from servitude. They would be their own master, not indentured to another, an emancipated individual, able to go where they wish. Thinking about this, they would be filled with joy and happiness. So a bondservant, I don't. This is kind of an unusual word. I don't know how many of you have heard that word before. If you have read Bhante Sujato's translations, you will have heard it. But apart from that, I'm not sure if this word is used very much in the world. So the usual translation for this is slave. So bondservant is a slightly less severe version of slavery, and that's why he used it. Because the slavery in ancient India was not like it wasn't the kind of very harsh version. You were like an indentured laborer or something like that instead. So what does it feel like to be a slave? Does it it's not considered very nice to be a slave. You have to do what your master says. If your master says A, you say yes sir, and you do A. If master says minus A, you say yes sir, and you do minus A, or maybe yes ma'am, or whatever. But you have to do what you are told. That's kind of what it is about. And this is the problem with restlessness. This is the problem with craving. This is the problem with desire. The desire is the master, and you have to say yes to your desire. And you think that you are free. You think, yay, desire, hooray! I'm going to follow my desires and enjoy myself in the world. I am really in control. And the desire is just it's just kind of what makes life interesting. Without desires, there's nothing going on. And you don't really realize that actually you are the slave of that desire. The desire, it drives you. And you always go around and say, yes sir, yes ma'am, desire, please come. Until one day you do some meditation practice. You sit down, you become incredibly peaceful. The desire is gone, and you start to realize that actually it was all dukkha all along. Yeah, I was just going along with the desire, thinking it was happiness, feeling alive because I was kind of exerting myself for some kind of purpose that actually wasn't very purposeful. I was just going around in circles at the end of the day. And you realize it was all a con job. Yeah, it was all the fool's game. There was nothing there. It was all empty. It wasn't going anywhere. Going in circles. Yeah, I've done this 1,000,000 times before. Now you're doing it again. It was an empty experience at the end of the day. It wasn't going anywhere. It was suffering on the way. And when you actually got to your goal, the goal itself was pretty meaningless. Isn't that terrible? That's really bad, right? It's suffering on the way. You're pursuing this goal, and you're pursuing a goal that isn't meaningful in the first place, or at least not very meaningful. Yeah, has a very shallow kind of meaning, and that is really what the Buddha is talking about. Yeah, you get these pleasures that you're trying to reach, and they turn out to be hollow. They turn out to be impermanent. They turn out to be not really satisfying. And then you search for another one, and you carry on like this. That's like the famous simile of the hungry dog and the bone and the skeleton. You know that simile, right? It's the simile that I teach on all of these retreats. So those of you who've been on this retreat before, you will know that simile. But it's a beautiful simile, and it's kind of very stark and very, the simile of for those of you who haven't heard it before, the simile of the dog and bone is this dog that goes to the butcher shop and it sits outside the butcher shop and waiting for the butcher to throw it some meat. It wants some meat from the butcher shop and it waits and waits and waits, and eventually when that butcher has kind of cleaned off all the meat from the bone, it's not going to give any good meat to a stray dog in the streets. And eventually, when all the valuable meat has been scraped off, it looks at the bone and it looks at the dog. Okay, you can have the bone. Yeah, so it chucks the bone to the dog. Yeah, and the bone is smeared with blood. And so the dog, really hungry and waiting, kind of gets this bone, gets the taste of blood. It tastes like meat, but there is no sustenance. It doesn't actually deliver anything. It just increases the craving. This is like us. Finally, you get something nice in the world, and the craving gets stronger because now you think that you can get what you want, and so you think you are in charge. You can control the world, and so you chase. Then that dog, getting that bone, getting really excited, goes off to the next butcher shop. Maybe the next butcher is going to be nice. Give me some real sustenance. Waiting outside. The butchers in this simile are always stingy. There is no compassion for stray dogs. Another bone, smeared with blood, and on that dog goes from butcher to butcher until it dies. Because that's what happens to stray dogs. Eventually they die, and then when it dies, it gets reborn. It gets reborn as a puppy. And then its mummy takes that puppy to the butcher shop, and it starts all over again. And that is kind of the simile here for samsaric existence. No real sustenance, no real goal, walking around and around, roaming around and around without any purpose, and all along just experiencing suffering. The craving is always there, driving you on without purpose, without goal. That is kind of the idea here. It's a very grim kind of idea, and it kind of sounds terrible when you hear it. But the point is, of course, that there is some truth to that, and that is where we need to see if there is some truth to that. Compare the satisfaction you find on the spiritual path, that you find in meditation, at least sometimes. Compare that to the running around in the world, being the slave of craving, craving whipping you over the back, saying, run, go faster, you can achieve more if you go faster. Don't be lazy, for goodness sake. What are you, sitting on a retreat? How are you spending your time? That's bad. Don't just sit there, do something. Whereas Ajahn Brahmali would say, don't just do something, sit there. That is kind of the right approach. So this is this idea of being a slave to restlessness, and a slave also to the anxiety and remorse. And that is a very important second aspect of this our fourth hindrance, is that actually if we break our precepts, yes, we try to forgive ourselves, yes, we try to let go because we understand how conditioned we are, but you also recognize that there is always a residue of remorse, a residue of anxiety that comes with that. So if you want to avoid that sense of anxiety that you're living in the wrong way, or remorse here does not mean that you necessarily upbraid yourself or you think that I am bad. It just means that your mind darkens a little bit. You don't have the same kind of joy. You don't have the same clarity of mind because you are doing something silly with your life. That's really what it means. And that also is really problematic here. So these two things are both things that don't really allow you peace in life. And so peace can then be achieved by overcoming this. And again, the overcoming of this happens in large part through the first two hindrances, overcoming those, because a lot of that restlessness comes from the worldly desires. Take those worldly desires away, and there's very little restlessness left. And it also comes, obviously, from just living well, keeping your precepts, being kind and a caring and compassionate person. And then these things kind of come together. So if you don't want to be a slave, this is how you overcome that slavery. This is the slave metaphor, or slave simile rather, used in the suttas. So now coming to the last of the five hindrances, it's actually interesting that one of the things it said at the top there was no loss of wealth. I forgot to mention that in connection with the tiredness and the lethargy in the tiredness. The idea there is that, when you come out of that lethargy, then you kind of get your faculties back again. Your memory of the Dhamma, etc., kind of returns. Because sometimes you get very lethargic. You may wonder whether you're ever going to get your faculties back. It kind of feels like you are a bit lost at that time. Then we have the last one. Suppose there was a person with wealth and property who was traveling along a desert road or a wilderness road. But after some time they would cross over that wilderness, safe and sound, with no loss of wealth. Thinking about this, they would be filled with joy and happiness. So, a person with wealth and property, traveling along a desert road. The idea of the desert road here is the idea of doubt. It has the fifth of the five hindrances. And the doubt is a bit like a desert. Because or a wilderness, if you like, because the idea here is that if you don't have anything that you kind of firmly, if you don't understand something, if you don't know where to go next, the most basic problem with doubt is that you don't have any confidence in anything in the world. You don't have a faith. You're not a Buddhist. You are nothing. You don't really understand the world. You are kind of just an atheist who just think you just live for the sensual pleasures, and when your life comes to an end, then you die, and that's the end of everything. And that kind of life can be quite empty. It can feel quite pointless, especially when you also understand the sufferings of life. Then the whole thing kind of seems a bit yucky, to be honest. You're like in a desert. There's nothing to sustain you. There's nothing to feel joyful about. I mean, if all you have is kind of the problems of the world, but none of the joys of the world, why would you be happy? What is there to be joyful about? There's nothing really to uplift you, to make life bearable in a sense. And so the idea of having faith in something higher, or having confidence in something more, is a wonderful thing. It makes life more bearable. It enables you to understand life more fully, because if you have something higher, it actually allows you to see life as it actually is, because you have something else to hold on to. But if you don't have anything else to hold on to, and all you have is kind of the ordinary life, then it's very hard to see it clearly. Why? Because we all need something to hold on to in the world. We need some kind of refuge. If we abandon everything, then we just might as well commit suicide. There's nothing really worth living for anymore. And so the idea of having something higher, like the Dhamma, also allows you to see the world more clearly, because you have a refuge somewhere that allows that. And it gives you sustenance, it gives you something to be happy about. You have the Buddha as your teacher, you have the Dhamma that is available. You're living a good life because you understand the power of that. You know what the refuge within is all about, the refuge of meditation, the refuge of samadhi. You understand these things. And so you don't have that dryness of the desert, nothing to sustain you. You have something to give you joy and happiness. And that is kind of the idea here of overcoming doubt. So doubt comes in a large degree, large kind of number of degrees. The kind of the most problematic doubt is where you don't have anything to believe in the world. You don't believe in the Buddha. The Buddha, he lived 2,500 years ago. What did he know? He didn't even have an iPhone. So how can you have any faith in the Buddha? He was kind of living a Stone Age kind of, or Iron Age, or whatever existence. And that is kind of the kind of conceit very often of the modern world. The conceit is that we are so advanced, we kind of understand much better than they did in the past. And this is a very common bias. It's one of those many cognitive biases we have as human beings, is that we always give preference to the present, as if the present somehow always must be better than the past. But sometimes maybe it is better, sometimes it is worse. It depends on what you're looking at. We think that we are advanced because when we look at the past, it looks like, well, we have moved forward from the past, and we have always been developing. But that's a bias. Have we always been developing? Well, it may be in certain areas, but maybe not in other areas. Have we always been developing spiritually? I would say probably not. I would say sometimes we have been going in reverse spiritually. So this is a very complicated picture. You can't just say that we are more advanced than the past. And so we need to try to get out of this cognitive bias whereby the present is much more important than everything in the past. It isn't always like that. Sometimes the past was more sophisticated in some ways, spiritually more sophisticated. And the Buddha was a spiritually incredibly sophisticated person. And we don't really have anything maybe quite like that in the present. We still have the Dhamma there, but maybe not quite to the same degree. And then the doubt comes also in your meditation practice. Maybe you don't know what to do next. Like some of the questions we were having yesterday evening. Oh, my meditation is going really well. What now? Well, enjoy what you have, and then kind of gradually you find your way through that. The way to overcome doubt is, in this area, is to investigate the wholesome and the unwholesome, the skillful and the unskillful. And as you investigate that, you find your way through the maze of doubt and uncertainty, moving towards more wholesome qualities. And this is kind of how you overcome the idea of doubt in meditation, in life in general, including about whether you believe in rebirth or not. All of these things, you just investigate, you keep on working with this. So again, it's nice not to be trapped on a desert road, and eventually when you come out of that doubt, then you come out the other end with no loss of wealth. Your kind of ideas about Dhamma are there, more strong than before. In fact, you have the wealth of the Dhamma, you carry that with you, and it kind of reappears again on the other side, seemingly vanishing for a while on the desert road because you couldn't really use it on that desert road. And when you see that you have overcome these hindrances and you have left them behind, then again you feel joy and happiness as a consequence of that. And this is the outcome of leaving these hindrances behind. So, coming to the last part here. In the same way, as long as these 5 hindrances are not given up inside themselves, a mendicant regards them as a debt, a disease, a prison, slavery, and a desert crossing. But when these 5 hindrances are given up inside themselves, a mendicant regards this as freedom from debt, good health, release from prison, emancipation. Emancipation means like freedom from slavery, right? It's another freedom. And a place of sanctuary at last. And that is the giving up of these 5 hindrances. So there's a lot of freedom to be had by leaving these behind. And then once the 5 hindrances have been left behind, then the deep meditations become accessible to you. That's the next stage. The jhanas become accessible, samadhi becomes accessible, the Brahma Viharas become accessible. And at this point, I should really talk about those things, but because my suttas are a bit jumbled up, it doesn't come at this stage. So I should really rearrange my suttas a little bit, but there you are. And of course, those are the really deep freedoms of the mind. When you come out of the 5 hindrances and then you achieve some great metta or karuna, the loving kindness or the compassion or whatever, or you enter a deep state of samadhi, that's where the real freedom arises. So here we, again, stage by stage, the various degrees of freedom. So now I want to come to the very last part, the very last kind of freedom on the Buddhist path. And this is the freedom of awakening itself. So after abandoning all the hindrances and after entering some of these samadhis, the various jhanas, the Brahma Viharas or whatever, beyond that comes the freedom of awakening. And so I want to just very briefly look at that before we start looking more deeply at the path and the practice to this freedom. So the next little sutta here is it's just an extract from quite a long sutta. And this sutta is called the Satcha Vibhanga Sutta. This is in the middle-length sayings of the Buddha, the Majjhima Nikaya 141, the analysis of the truths. And of course, the truths here are the 4 noble truths. And so this is the analysis of the 4 noble truths. And I'm going to look very briefly at 2 of these noble truths. And because they show you the full freedom on the path, how it is achieved. And so what is the noble truth of the origin of suffering? It is the craving that leads to future lives, mixed up with relishing and greed, taking pleasure wherever it lands, taking pleasure here and there. That is craving for sensual pleasures, craving to continue existence, and craving to end existence. This is called the noble truth of the origin of suffering. What is the noble truth of the cessation of suffering? It is the fading away and cessation of the very same craving, with nothing left over. Giving it away, letting it go, releasing it, and not clinging to it. This is called the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. So this is the highest kind of release, the highest kind of freedom, the freedom from all kinds of suffering. And this is the idea, the end point of the Buddhist path, when all suffering is left behind. And maybe, I don't know what that sounds to, whether it sounds like a good idea. I guess it sounds like a good idea. But it may also sound a bit bland. All suffering is left behind, then what? What happens then? It sounds a bit boring. All suffering is gone. But of course, again, the point here is that when you eliminate the negative aspects of existence, the positive aspects really come out. And so this is equivalent to the highest happiness. And so when you end all suffering, you also achieve the highest happiness. And this is what we were seeing at the very beginning of this retreat. We're looking at the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree, the Ficus religiosa, the tree of awakening. And he was sitting there experiencing the bliss of liberation for 7 days. That is kind of how powerful that bliss is. You don't really want to move anymore. There's nothing more to be done. You're just sitting there, just blissing out for 7 days. And so it is a very powerful thing, this ending of dukkha. And so this needs to be understood in the right way. So what are we seeing here? First of all, the origin of suffering, right? And the origin suffering First of all, the important point here is that it is the craving that leads to future lives. The porno bhavika tanna, porno bhavika, porno means again, bhava means existence, so it leads to again existence. That is the kind of craving we are talking about. Not just any kind of craving, not just any kind of desire. And then you have mixed up with relishing and greed, taking pleasure wherever it lands. So these are just kind of giving an idea of what this kind of craving is about. It's kind of a very broad craving, which kind of is full of greed and desires, and it takes pleasures kind of here and there. There's no end to the kind of craving we're talking about. But you will see that there are three things going on here. One is suffering, which is the problem. Then there is the cause of suffering, which is the craving. There's two things. And then there is the idea of rebirth. So these are the three things here that this noble truth is talking about. The craving that leads to suffering via the idea of rebirth. And those three ideas are the core ideas of dependent origination. So what you're seeing here is dependent origination in brief. That's what you're seeing. And so the way the Buddha then later on, when he starts to expand his teachings and he talks about these things in a broad and large number of ways, he expands this formula from 3, eventually reaching to 12 links, the 12 links of dependent origination, or the 12 factors of dependent origination, if you like. This is the core of that. And so you can see how that very simple insight on the night of awakening, that craving is the cause of suffering, leads to these very beautiful, expansive teachings that shows you in detail how this whole process rolls on via the 12 links of dependent origination. But it really comes down to this simple idea: craving leads to rebirth. That rebirth, well, that itself is what suffering really is. That is the cause of suffering. Because if you die and everything is gone, well, of course, no suffering, right? But this is how the whole thing is driven on into the future. And so that this is mixed up with relishing and greed, so you're always delighting here and there, you're greedy about this and that. There's endless amounts of desires you can have, and you take pleasure, tatra tatra abhinandini, delighting here and there, is basically the Pali saying here. And these things are the craving for sensual pleasures, the craving to continue existence, and the craving to end existence. This is the origin of suffering. So if you want to overcome suffering, you have to overcome these 3 kinds of craving. And the first one there is the craving for sensual pleasures. And that in many ways is the most difficult one to overcome, because our life is so fully enmeshed with the sensory world. It's very hard to give up that craving. It's like a swamp, is how it's talked about in the suttas. You are trying to get out of this enormous swamp, stretching out in all directions, and you are stuck, you're sinking into it, even though you're wearing gumboots, or maybe you're not, you're kind of stuck and you try to move. It's like treacle, and you're trying to get out of this. And it's really, really hard to get out. And that is why you will find meditation is often challenging. It is challenging because you are stuck in that swamp. This is kind of one of many similes used in the suttas to explain the problem of the 5 sense realm. And so, gradually, we extract ourselves from that realm, and you start to achieve some of the joys and happinesses and the peace, the freedom, the liberation, all the positive things that you find in meditation practice, gradually coming out of that realm. And so this is kind of, in many ways, the hardest job on the spiritual path, that movement away from that, because it is so sticky. So if you can do that, and you can achieve maybe a deep state of samadhi, and some of you are doing really well in your meditation, you already have some idea what this means, and that's wonderful. It means that you are on the way out of this whole problem. And then, when you come out of that problem, the next one is to give up the craving for continued existence. That's the next one. And that is very, very profound. But once you have emerged from the five sense realm, then that is something that you can do. It is no longer as difficult. Yeah, that last part, in fact, is comparatively easy compared to the first part, because now you are already enjoying yourself. You're already having a good time because the meditation is going so well. And now you just have to extract yourself from the desire to exist again in the future. But as long as you are stuck in the five sense realm, there is no way you can get out of the desire of existence. You don't even know what it means. What could it possibly even mean? It makes absolutely no sense. So you have to overcome things in the right sequence, starting with overcoming the five sense world. Only then can you really start to contemplate the desire for existence, at least fully, understand fully what it means. And that is done by, understanding that this carrying on in rebirth, now getting reborn here, now getting reborn there, always just roaming around, doing the same thing again and again and again, sometimes getting reborn in good places, sometimes in bad places. After a while you think, why am I doing this? This is madness. It's just suffering without purpose. It's not going anywhere, just doing the same thing again and again and again. How many relationships do you need? How many relationships have you already had? Yeah, okay, in this life, maybe not so many. Yeah, I don't know what the average is for people, But over kind of the big expanses of time, we've gone through this again and again and again. Yeah, and the Buddha has some very stark similes for what is going on. He says, you have cried more tears than there is water in the four oceans because of the various kinds of suffering of existence. Yeah, so this very kind of stark similes of the Buddha. Should you believe that? No, you shouldn't believe it, but you should take it, if the Buddha said, okay, I should take it seriously. Yeah, that is kind of the idea here. And then eventually you do, and as you kind of eliminate these things at the same time as you see the danger of these things, you also find meaning in the Dhamma, you find purpose in the Dhamma, you find blisses and joys that are outside of ordinary human experience, that are so profound and so meaningful that you are actually very happy to give up all of these coarser things of existence. Yeah, one of the things about deep samadhi is that it gives you a sense of meaning. It gives you a sense of meaning because when craving stops, that is the same thing as discovering meaning. Because craving means that you haven't found meaning yet. You're still looking for it. That's why you have desires. You're still looking to find fulfillment. You're looking to find completion in your life. But finding that completion and fulfillment means that there is no more craving. You have found the meaning of life. That's what it means. And ultimately that comes all the way around. Yeah, when you also have the insight into these things, etc., etc., you find the final, the real meaning of existence. That's what is this path really promises you. So it promises you everything. Yeah, there's nothing really missing. And that's kind of what is so extraordinary about this. So then, so that is the second noble truth, and the things that you have to overcome. And that is expressed beautifully in the third noble truth about the cessation of suffering. It is the fading away and cessation of that very same craving, the craving that leads to rebirth. So when you end the craving that leads to rebirth, well then obviously you're also ending rebirth itself. With nothing left over, giving it away, letting it go, releasing it, and not clinging to it. This is called the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. Letting all that go, no more holding on. This beautiful sequence of words, the chaga, the patinisagga, the mutti, and the analaya, the four Pali words that are used here, of letting go of everything and not holding on to anything. And that is the cessation of suffering, and that is the highest kind of liberation you can find on the Buddhist path. And then we have the very last little sutta here, Majjhima Nikaya 128, on corruptions. And this is kind of what happens when you come to that final freedom on the path. And the Buddha is talking about his own experience. This is one of those great things about the suttas, the Buddha talking about his own life before his awakening and how he experienced these things. It's very inspiring to read those suttas. Majjhima Nikaya 128 is one of these great suttas. And the Buddha says about himself that when I had developed stillness or samadhi in these ways, and these ways are basically the jhanas. If you read that sutta, it doesn't use the word jhanas, but it uses terminology that means the jhanas. When you had developed these jhanas, the knowledge and vision arose in me. Based on those jhanas, it then had the insight into rebirth and the insight into the ending of the defilements. The vision and the knowledge arose. My freedom is unshakable. This is my last rebirth. Now there are no more future lives. So this is kind of what happens when you come to the end of the path. Your freedom, your liberation is unshakable. There's no returning to bondage anymore. There's no more returning to lack of freedom. Now you have come out of this once and for all. And what that means is that you know that there is no more rebirth. It's not just that there isn't any rebirth, you know that there is no more rebirth. And you may wonder, how can you know that? Well, you know that because you know the causes for rebirth have been destroyed. And you have seen the conditional relationship between craving and rebirth, and so you know that the craving has ended. You know that rebirth must also have ended. It may be very difficult to understand how that is possible, but that is basically what the Buddha says. When you understand the conditional relationship between craving and rebirth, then you know that rebirth has been ended as a consequence. And this is the highest kind of liberation and freedom on the Buddhist path. This is the end of the whole thing. And then you are fully awakened. That's what awakening means in Buddhism. So these are the various levels of freedom for you. Coming through, starting with a very simple thing, starting out with the idea of just generosity, and going through with morality and how morality frees up your mind from all kinds of negative consequences, including fear, but also the remorse and all of these kind of things are also part of that. It makes your mind much lighter. It unburdens your mind if you live a very moral life. And then you carry on the path, but taking the morality deeper and deeper, freeing your mind from the hindrances, freeing your mind from all of these negative thoughts that burden you again, and eventually reaching the great vimokkha's, the great liberations of mind that happen in samadhi. Already, if you have mindfulness, you already have a degree of freedom and liberation of the mind, because mindfulness is a sense of being awake, of being aware, of coming out of this fantasy life and always living in the past and the future, not living in the reality of the here and now. But then when you come to the deep samadhis, it's like your mind is freed from almost everything in the world. It's like you're leaving all the worldly conditions behind. Everything that you have known, everything that you have lived in before, all the sights, the sounds, the smells, the tastes, all of that is left behind, and the mind kind of expands. The mind becomes transparent, beautiful, unburdened, bright, luminous. Luminous is one of those beautiful translations of jhanas and samadhi. This is what happens to the mind at this stage. And you feel a freedom that you have never really experienced before. You're releasing some of the things that you really start to understand what prison is about. And one of the amazing things in the suttas, when you compare these deep stages of samadhi with the awakening experiences, the Buddha always classify these things together. They are of the same kind. These are real liberations of the mind. We are freeing the mind. They're all called ceto vimuttis, liberations of the mind. And so this is why you're starting to get a taste, deep meditation, we're getting a taste of what awakening actually is. They are called Sambodha Sukha. The happiness of awakening is what these deep meditations are called. And yet, you're still not at the end of the path, because the very last part of the path is what we have been talking about just now. The ability, using those deep meditations, using them for insight, understanding the connection between craving and rebirth, and craving and suffering. And when you see that connection, using that insight, that you using those samadhis as a foundation for insight, that is when you reach the highest kind of liberation. So this is a kind of the how liberation progresses gradually, stage by stage. Don't overthink it. Don't think that you can understand this just by contemplating it. This has to come through experience. To understand freedom, use your meditation experiences. Use your experiences in daily life of practicing this path, and try to understand it in light of what you have been reading in the suttas. This is the best way to do this. If you try to think it through, you're just going to go slightly nuts after a while, and I don't want to have any nuts people on this retreat. So please don't become nuts. Follow through by seeing what happens in a meditation practice. And then the next part comes starting from now on. We're going to look much more at the actual practice. Of course, theory and practice always go together. So we have looked more at the kind of the right view side of things. There's been a lot of theory and a lot of practical suggestions already. But now we want to move more over to the practical side of things and spend the rest of the retreat just looking at that side. But that is all for now, so please carry on, enjoy yourself, and we'll see you back again at 3 o'clock this afternoon.